Good afternoon, everyone. As here we say in Newcastle, I read. First of all, I promised not to talk about the Newcastle United takeover. But we are here to talk about an important topic, which is accessibility and inclusion. All week, we've been sharing content alongside 150 amazing organisations to raise awareness of the importance of accessibility, something that obviously is very close to my heart. This webinar is the centre of our week, and it's amazing to see how many of you have joined us. After campaigning for 10 years on this subject, it warms my heart to see so many organisations, particularly blue chips, now taking this very, very seriously. We have some amazing guest speakers and some really important points to discuss. But hey, let's not waste any more time. But first of all, it is a webinar, so we've got to do some housekeeping. And that I will pass over to our Head of Marketing, Michael, for the housekeeping.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Everyone's on mute, so everyone will be avoiding any background noise. To enable live captioning, please click on the live transcript button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and then click show subtitles. Regarding questions, if you don't mind using the Q&A button at the bottom, please just put them in there, and then Laura and the team will pull them together and then we can discuss them at the end. Technical problems, please just use the chat function as well, and we'll do our best to help you. This webinar is being recorded and will be available at the end of the session into next week on our YouTube channel. Today's session will be interactive with a few polls, so please get involved, please answer the questions, and we can discuss the outcomes. And finally, just thank you very much for joining us.
Cool, right? Thank you very much, Michael. Let's start off with some quick fire introductions from our guests. I'll start off myself. I am Ross Linnett. I'm the CEO of the technology and the campaigning organisation Recite.
Dave.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Messenger. I'm the EDI and Disability Access Officer at Watford Football Club. It's a pleasure to be here and not think about Newcastle United's imminent take.
I promise not to talk about
it. Charlotte?
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Sweeney. I've specialised in diversity, equity and inclusion for about 25 years now, worked in many blue chip and Fortune 500 companies, and now work with them, advising them on diversity, equity and inclusion.
Thank you. And Jurgen?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jurgen Donaldson. I've been in the recruitment world for the last 17 years, and for the last 2 years since losing my eyesight, I've become an advocate for the visually impaired.
And Sophie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie. I'm a university student and I have dyslexia.
Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, everyone. I'm Michael Halpman, Head of Marketing here at Recite, and I'm also dyslexic, and it's been much of a journey working for Recite and Ross, and I'm looking forward to today's session.
And a very valued member. So thanks, everyone. Right, let's kick off with what the word accessibility actually means. But one of the first points I want to make here is this isn't an exercise to try and hone into what accessibility should be, because it's a very individual and personal thing for many different people. And it's something that's actually constantly evolving over time, particularly with the advent of a lot of technology. Accessibility has different context and connotations of what it did mean 10 years ago. But let's touch on what the dictionary actually says. And I think there's an irony here. I find the grammar in this dictionary definition pretty bad, and it's come from a dictionary, but here we go. It says, accessibility is easy to approach, reach, enter, speak, or use, be able to be used, entered, or reached, suitable for disabled people to reach, enter, use as a result of design modifications, readily understandable. So ultimately, this means ease of access to everyone, no barriers. The key is no barriers. But what we know, this isn't always the case, and accessibility can mean a number of different things in the real world. In my world in particular, that can mean compliance, because we're into technology, standards, and even laws. But that's something I won't go into too much at the moment. But one question people always ask Recite me is, how many people do we help online, and what is the actual need? What is the actual scale of the issue? So I think one of the good ways to start this whole exercise is to talk about the facts and the figures. And for that, I will pass over to my trusty assistant, Michael Halpin. I was going to say the glamorous assistant there, Michael, but you're on mute, by the way.
I was laughing there. Thank you, Ross. So what I'll do quickly is share my screen and we'll look at some facts here. So I hope everyone can see my screen there. Nice little intro slide. First, we'll just look at some overall facts. And I think the one that stands out is that over 25% of people have a disability or struggle with a learning difficulty. That's a huge, percentage of people that need support in one way or another. And also accessibility is not just people with disabilities. It's also people who maybe can't speak English as a second language or just need other types of support not related to disabilities. So like you said there, 13% of the global population speak English as a second language. Recruitment and talent, very important, as we'll get onto. Some key facts that you can see on the screen. As many as 75% of civil job seekers feel their condition has an impact on their job search, which is not good at all. And I'm sure Jurgen will support us in talking about that later. But yeah, once again, another bunch of facts here, showing the scale of what we can play our part in helping. Education. Once again, we talk about international students. This is content specifically when it comes to Recite Me that needs to be able to be read regardless of your needs or where you're from. Nearly 500,000 students in the UK are international, and 17.3% of students in higher education are known to have a disability as well. So once again, making sure that vital content is accessible physically and online is very important. In the workplace, so making a workplace inclusive and diverse, also great, isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do, as you can see on some of the facts there. Decision making, better decision making, 80% with a diverse team, making sure that we're all part of one, also plays a big part here at Recite Me. So yes, I just wanted to throw some facts down there, give us a foundation of what we're working with and how we're trying to help people.
Thank you, Michael. And we can all agree that there some of the opening facts there we can learn, and it just demonstrates, I think, that there's the scale of the issue and how all of us need to endeavour personally and through our organisations to make information and other parts of our lives as accessible as possible. But before I move on, this is the first part of the interactive round. And bear in mind, this is our first webinar we've hosted ourselves, so we've got the stabilizers on. Let me ask you guys a question. Okay. And there's a poll here. Gartner found that inclusive teams improve performance by X amount in high diversity environments. Can everybody pick? Hopefully everybody can see the poll. And if you can pick what percentage it improved team performance. How long do we keep this poll going?
I think we're good there, aren't we?
We're good. Oh,
there we go.
Wow. So I think we got caught out because it's always going to be the highest number, isn't it here? But yeah, that is right. 30% improvement in being an inclusive team and high diversity. So the point is that it can be a power being inclusive. It's not just the right thing to do. It can be a power for your organization to help many things that Michael discussed before, such as decision making in like diverse points of view.
So yeah, so I think that in a lovely segue into Charlotte. So Charlotte, is it okay if we can start discussing as a team about how businesses can start addressing accessibility and why it's good for business?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael and Ross. So let me share a few perspectives with the organisations I've worked with and also the work that we do around the whole inclusion agenda. So of course, this includes these elements that we're talking about here. I think the first thing to think about when organisations talk about being inclusive, And the amount of companies I hear that say we want everybody to be able to be themselves, or everybody to be their true selves at work, it always staggers me that then organizations are not looking at the elements around disability within their workplace. Because actually for many of us to be able to be ourselves and to feel really included, this agenda needs to be right in the center of it, first of all. Many organizations say to me, so how can we do this? And I was reflecting on, Ross, the definition that you shared around accessibility that didn't sound completely accessible to me. So I agree with you on that one. But there was an element that said there about design modification. And the bit that I think organizations, and we all should flip on the head a little bit and turn it the other way, is asking the question, how can we ensure that the maximum amount of people can access our products, our services, or us as an employer? And how can we think about that in the way that we're designing our products, our services, and the way that we operate as an organization for our employees? So what could the barriers be? And how do we eliminate those barriers? Now, we saw in that poll that comment around 30% increased productivity, motivation, morale, all those different things that we see in a lot of pieces of research around when you've got diverse teams and when they feel included, the impact it could have. And it's important to reflect on this from a disability standpoint as well, and true accessibility as well, because we need to get those diverse views and opinions around the table for us as organizations to be able to create great products, great services, a great employee experience, regardless of who you are. So I want to share some examples on that. I want to share a few examples of what I've seen in organizations, and then come back to the how do we do it. There was a recent piece of research last year around customer service, and I think the data is available on the Scope website. If not, I'm very happy to share the link to it. And it showed that 75% of people with disabilities actually moved away from companies because of the poor customer service they were receiving. And I actually shared this with a chief executive and his direct reports. And the response to me was, yeah, but everybody probably experiences poor customer service. So is that a relevant fact? And I said, well, if there's 75% of a part of the population that don't feel that they're getting the great service and are moving on, then as an organization, we should be worried about it. And given that in 2017, the BBC cited that the expenditure that can be spent by people with disabilities and their carers exceeded £249 billion a year, I think organisations would want to tap into that. So let me share some examples of what I've seen. A number of years ago, Sky did a fantastic piece of work around their remote controls. They wanted to really focus on how they could make sure they were fully accessible for people that had problems with their dexterity. What they then found was the remote control that they created for people with dexterity issues worked for everyone, and people preferred that product over the original one they had. If we think about BT, there was a great piece of work one of my old colleagues did around their phones and creating bigger, large push button phones to support people with visual impairments, but also dexterity challenges as well. They found that that phone with the larger buttons sold more than the other phones that they were creating. We've also seen an increase in customer services organisations that now are using video conferencing, using more sign language to support customers as well. And then when we think about our smartphones and how we use those, whichever version we may decide to use, increasingly we're having the options of changing the font, changing the colour, using the dictation services. And for many organisations, that dictation service, whether you're using it in Microsoft or something else, that's being used far more with people that don't need it from an accessibility point of view, that it just works well for everyone. So the question here is, how do we make sure we bring all of this into the way that we create our products and services so it benefits everyone, and we're not purely thinking about a small part or a perceived small part of the population by organisations. The other bit I want to touch on is people, and this is going to fit perfectly into Jurgen's experience and also the work that he does around recruitment as well. because this needs to be factored into the whole employee life cycle. This needs to be factored into every piece of thinking we do if we want to bring really great talent into our organizations. I'm sure there's many of us on this webinar that when we're looking at recruitment, we'll have some form of reasonable adjustment process. We'll ask if people need support or need other offerings when they're going through the recruitment process so they can be their best selves. What I see lots of organizations do is then forget to have that conversation after that person has been successful to get the role. It's not considered about what they need when they come into the workplace. And I'm sure Jurgen will have some views and perspectives around that. So getting our reasonable adjustment processes, thinking about how we operate and how we can make sure it's fully accessible for everyone, should be right in the center of every conversation we have. And given that so many of us are working in a hybrid world now, whatever that means for our organizations, that should give us more opportunities to broaden these elements of accessibility and have more conversations about accessibility, making sure it works for everyone than ever before. So I want to go back to that first bit about how put it right in the center of your conversations, right at the very start of the conversations about our products, our practices, our services, what we do for our employees. The question should be, if we value inclusion and we value diverse talent and we value that diversity of thought that Ross mentioned right at the very beginning, the conversation should be straight away, how do we ensure that everything we do is accessible for every single person and that we are removing those barriers and bias right from the start rather than trying to retrofit it a little bit later. So there are my thoughts around what businesses can do on those different elements. I'm sure Jurgen's going to give us some greater insight when it comes to our people and what we do as employers.
Thank you, Charlotte. Jurgen?
Apologies, I was having the atypical blind person experience of trying to find the unmute button. It's always a challenge, so my apologies. And the other thing I will say is, if I'm ever not looking at the camera, which I will occasionally do as I start talking, it's not because I've lost interest, I just forget where my camera is. So I sincerely apologize if I do that. I think so much of what Charlotte touched on is so important and so relevant to a lot of how I have to look at things and the conversations I have with organizations and various elements of what I do. And Charlotte, the purple pound, as you described, the spending power of disabled people was now most recently noted at being £274 billion. So it's grown even greater in the last couple of years. It's really quite remarkable. But when it comes to people, there was a recent study by the University of Birmingham in collaboration with the Vision Foundation, who I'm a big supporter of, that revealed that 60% of employers were confident that their recruitment processes were accessible. In my experience, that's probably being pretty generous. And I'd ask every employer to really consider, have you evaluated whether your process is accessible? Have you evaluated whether anybody and everybody can complete your recruitment process or application process? Because particularly, it's great to say that you want to create a more inclusive environment, that you want to have a diverse workforce, you believe that people should feel included, that they're going to have equity and equality. But too often, far too often, things fall down at the very first stage, where people can't actually get through the application process to submit their CV. And lo and behold, you will find that if people can't apply for jobs with you, you're probably going to find that, yeah, you're not getting a very high rate of disabled applicants. And in the last kind of 18 months of the world that we've seen through the pandemic, the transformation towards working from home has allowed a far greater variety of individuals to consider jobs that they may never have been able to consider before. You know, we have been able to get away from this idea that you have to be in the office or you're not part of our team. You have to be in the office or you're not part of our culture. The reality for many disabled people is that they have to work from their bed some days. And it's something I'd ask you to think about and remember, is that essentially, sorry, apologies, sometimes when the chat box goes off, it goes off in my voiceover and it's slightly distracting, so my apologies. One of the things that people kind of need to consider as employers is, when we move to the Zoom culture, do people really need to have their camera on? Because some people will be in environments working from home, but they just don't want to do that. When it comes to the statistics around individuals in the workplace, one of the other things that came out from the University of Birmingham study, and I say this because it does relate to me, and I think they are good examples from the visually impaired community, is that when it comes to people like me who are severely sight impaired, so I have no useful vision, we have a rate of 90% unemployment. 74% of visually impaired people across the UK population are unemployed. And when you look at the reasons for why, that does stretch across, I think, the full spectrum of disability and disadvantage when it comes to access to employment opportunities. I don't think it's unique to disabled people. I think there are other elements within the diversity spectrum where this applies, but one of the statistics that came out was that 94% of people believed that visually impaired person could not do their job. 94%. I'm sorry, but that just to me is completely illogical. You know, it just doesn't really add up. So essentially, when we look at the recruitment life cycle, let's start with the application process. Really break down, is your application process accessible to everybody? When you get to the interview process, the same thing needs to apply. Are you actively asking individuals what adjustments they might need? Are you really thinking about how you create an inclusive process for individuals? You know, when you're looking at the full diversity piece, are you including diverse people in your recruitment processes? Are you giving individuals an ability to interact with individuals from within perhaps their community in your organization? One of the best processes I went through in the last couple of years, the company, when I identified myself as being disabled, asked if I wanted to speak to their disabled employee group as part of the process to learn more about their corporate culture. I thought that was a great way of helping me to understand as a potential employee who they were as an organization. And I guess to what Charlotte said, when you hire individuals from diverse backgrounds, one of the key things is, once they're within your organization, how do you really help them to embed? How do you help them to feel part of your organization as you move forward? Do you continue to ask them, how's it going? How can we help you to settle into the business? But also remember, and I think this is equally important, that as employers, the onus is on you to create a place where individuals with different disabilities quite naturally can gain access to many of the things that they need. It's not the job of disabled people to tell you as employers what you need to do. That has to come from you. That has to be part of how you create your inclusive workforce where people can truly feel that they belong. And I'll finish on this. As an employer, I'd like you all to go away and ask yourself this question. What does diversity mean to us? And if it doesn't include disability, if it doesn't include the full spectrum of protected characteristics and unprotected characteristics, I'm going to suggest to you that you're not yet being diverse and you need to think about it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jurgen, for that. So we've had some great conversations there with Charlotte and Jurgen around business and the importance of people to create them environments within our businesses. So we'd like to have a speak now to Dave Messenger, who's going to enlighten us around how this all works out for a Premier League football team. You know, a wide range of fans from all over the world, and what's the right thing to do to support fans online and offline from a sporting perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's really eye-opening statistics and some shocking sort of numbers in those two presentations. Trying to bring this back, and I sat thinking while I was listening, how do I bring this conversation back and talk about something exciting like Premier League football? And it's kind of, for me, the whole aspect of accessibility at Premier League football clubs, at Watford, at Newcastle, at other clubs, it all comes back to a moment in time And I'm just going to take you guys on a little journey and give you a sort of bit of background as to how Premier League clubs, including Watford, got to the point we've got to. So, I mean, as no real secret to know that the Premier League has got the kind of cachet of being money rich, and there's been plenty of cash for football clubs. And I was really interested that someone in the comments earlier on talked about the business case for inclusion and the business case for accessibility. And for football clubs, for Premier League football clubs especially, that side of things never comes into it. It's a moral obligation. It is a moral obligation for us to ensure that our facilities, our stadiums, our online world, our ticketing, everything that we do has to speak to inclusion and has to speak to disabled supporters that want to watch the football here. And I think what clubs did around 2015, some people may already know about this, but the Premier League clubs got together in 2015 and made a commitment to accessibility. So all 20 clubs, without any abstentions, agreed to meet the minimum requirements of the accessible stadia guidelines, and in many cases to try and exceed those guidelines. 20 clubs, obviously promotion and relegation comes along, so teams drop out, new teams come in. But since the Premier League made that commitment, the numbers of accessible spaces, so wheelchair spaces, ambulant disabled spaces, within football stadiums has risen by around about 60%. And this is due to the numbers and the vast amount of time and resource that football clubs have put into improving the access around their stadiums. So I think for us as a Premier League club, how we can support our fans and how we can support the wide range of needs, I think to answer that question more than anything else, you go back to communication and you go back to conversation. And we're in an advantageous position. We can meet our supporters on a Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock when they come to a stadium, and we can have a chat face to face about how they might have, what access requirements they might have, and we can deal with those as best we can. But I think the whole point of having that conversation, being able to speak to supporters or being able to communicate with supporters and find out what they need, enables us and almost encourages us to make those improvements to our stadiums, to our facilities, to our online world. So we're given that advantage. So how do we make that advantage work for us? Well, we take that information. We've provided so many different spaces, but in an online world as well, our ticketing now is automated enough that people with disabilities can use our ticketing services. We have a whole range of different products within the stadium. So we have what we call Recite headsets. So these are audio descriptive commentary headsets for supporters of visual impairments. So if you come into a stadium with a visual impairment, you order one of these headsets, it's delivered to your seat, and you can listen to a descriptive commentary of the match. So we're not talking about the usual Radio 5 bland commentary about the match. We're talking about a descriptive commentary. If somebody goes down injured, there's not a whole conversation about what the team is going to do to get past the injury. The description is the player is down injured, the physio has come on and is trying to treat the injury. It looks like it might be an ankle injury. So that having that descriptive commentary instead of just a standard radio commentary is hugely beneficial for supporters that arrive with visual impairments. We have now induction loops or hearing loops on all of our catering kiosks at the stadium. All of our hospitality areas have got those as well, the ticket office, the reception areas. So again, another example of what we've done on a match day to improve things. And on our website, we've made our website as accessible as we possibly can by using some of the products that Recite have given us, but also by doing an online tour. So a visual tour, a tour that supporters can look online to see what the view will be like from their seats. And again, for those supporters with visual impairments, there's descriptions, audio descriptions of what the facilities are going to be when they arrive at the stadium. So all of these things that we've put in place help to make our stadium as inclusive as it possibly can be. And to say to our supporters that we want to be inclusive, we want to make sure that everybody can come to the football, enjoy a match. And that's what we've been trying and set out to do since that commitment was made. I'm pleased to say we've managed to do it.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for that, Dave. It says in my notes there to thank Dave for his kind words. So it's probably the fact that I mentioned NUFC at the start that you didn't say any kind words, but was so next I'm personally going to share my story of how I got involved in disability and inclusion and made it my life mission. I was actually diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 22. So I'd actually graduated, I'd managed to get all the way through the education system, even though I'd approached one of my teachers and said, I'm dyslexic, I believe. And she says, don't be silly, no, you're not. And this was in high school. But I fought my way through and I studied engineering. And then finally, a friend recommended I get a test when I was president of the student union, as I mentioned before. Now, to be president of the union, you can't actually be a student at the same time, but you're in the university environment. So I was within the university environment and got access and given a lot of this software for free. And I installed the software that was right for me. So I changed the background color, I changed the text, and it opened up my world because I've always been a very inquisitive person. I love knowledge, I love learning, but I hate reading. So it kind of didn't make sense. If I went to a website, I would get bored. If I was going to purchase something, I'd probably get bored before reading the description and go somewhere else. But it changed my life. And then I went back to a different computer and I was back to square one. And I was like, this can't work properly. That my world is accessible in front of this computer. Yet when I go to this other computer, I'm back to being in an inaccessible world. And then I went to the library and I was to the point where that, because I didn't have admin access, those machines were always going to be inaccessible to me. Now, roughly at this time, we were involved as a student movement in writing with the green paper and the white paper, the first Disability Discrimination Act. Showing me age here, but it's touching 20 years ago now. And one of the principles of this legislation was it wasn't the responsibility of the individual to get around their accessibility needs, no matter what that accessibility is. It's the responsibility of the organization that they're interacting with. So if it's a physical disability, the organization has to make the adjustment by providing the ramp. Prior to that, it was up to the individual to try and, in a legal sense, figure a way in. But it was also like that with content, that it was my responsibility to buy the software, but then next, when the disability legislation kicked in, it was the responsibility of the organization. And that's when I realized then that we've got to dedicate my time in our organization to encourage companies to make their information as accessible as possible at source. And that's something that Recite it was a technology Recite invented. I don't want to talk too much about product, but we allowed websites that have similar functionality to what a computer would be. So if you go to a website, it will speak to you, it will change your background color, it will translate the language into your native language and even speak it in that accent. And it's amazing to see the take up at the minute. And this is a little bit of a plug because I'm so proud of what the guys have done. And we have some massive organizations such as VW, Tesco, using our software. And I'll just quickly get to me. That's it. But next of all, I want to pick your brains on assistive technology, because this is the point that I'm trying to make about take-up. And Laura would like to start our first poll, please. And that is globally, how many people do you think need one or more assistive products in their lives? So more people got it wrong than what I originally thought. I think people were going to try to outguess us that we wouldn't have the top as the actual answer, but the top is actually 1 billion. And 1 billion is actually a crazy, crazy number. So the next poll, which I've just found now, for the people who actually need this assistive technology, how many people actually have access to it? Yeah, and a lot of people got that right. That's only 1 in 10. So that's incredible to think that out of the 1 billion people that need it worldwide, only 10% of people have access to it. And this is where our campaign kicks in, is we're trying to encourage organizations to take responsibility at the source and make their information as accessible as possible at the source, and not rely on some person that's going to access their content to have software installed on their computer. We always encourage both as well. So, and today I'm happy to announce that Recite supports roughly about 500,000 people per month. And in the last 12 months, 16.5 million people have went on web pages using Recite's technology. But we often talk about how online accessibility is very important because it's the right thing to do, or it's a legislative driver. But from a commercial point of view, it's very, very important as well. You've got to remember some of the stats that we're originally talking about the amount of people that are disabled. Now, there was an independent study by National Car Rental done in 2019. So it hasn't come from the industry, and the figures haven't been swayed towards any like the industry, but it's done from an independent source. And the online spending power with people with accessibility needs is 24.8 billion. The percentage of people that go to a different website when their accessibility needs are not met is 83%. So 83% of people, like myself, who go to a website that isn't adjusted for dyslexia will go to another website. And that click away pound in 2019 stood at 17.1 billion of displaced spending. So just to repeat that, that's 17.1 billion pounds of people purposely not spending their money on inaccessible websites. And that's something for people to consider, particularly from a commercial perspective. But obviously one of the sectors that's close to my heart is education, because this is where Recite all started its campaign. And I'm delighted to pass over to Sophie to share her experiences about her accessibility needs in the education sector. So over to you, Sophie.
Hello everyone. So I have recently started university last year, and being late to a diagnosis of dyslexia, I've struggled through my whole of my school life. I found the diagnosis quite difficult to deal with, and kind of felt like my out of the box thinking was just going to waste. I was finding the workload difficult, the reading, and the demands of university was getting to me. And I reached out to Recite Me, and it was like the lens to my world was reopened, because I was able to access through their great technology my reading. My world had literally just opened up again. There's the screen reader, there's the underlining, the tinting of the screen, and just all these different elements that to me personally have made such a difference to the way I study, to the way I've achieved at university, and giving me such a confidence that I'm actually able to do things and not let the dyslexia hold me back. I'm taking shorter time to do reading, and I'm being much more successful just because I've been able to use this brilliant accessible technology throughout my studies. And through this experience, I've met a lot of other people that have dyslexia, and they don't realise about how helpful accessible technology is to studying, and how it benefits me not just once, but every single day when I'm studying, when I'm in my lectures, when I'm in my seminars, and when I'm doing my reading. The technology itself allows me to have that vision that everyone automatically has, and I'm forever grateful for it, because it's given me the confidence. And I've taken on a new role at university this year as a department rep for education to empower other people to speak out, and I really hope that more people can have this accessible access to all of the support that Recite Me have offered me, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That's much appreciated. I think it's fantastic to hear different people's perspectives, from business to startups, with Ross and Jurgen's experience, and Dave from football, and obviously Sophie as well from an education perspective. Sophie's story is very much like mine. Yeah,
It's almost
fantastic.
like
Yeah,
a repeat of history.
it's really good. I think when you listen to Sophie's story, even myself, and Ross was saying, you sort of think back to when I was at school, and my glasses used to steam up when I used to read because I was always panicking and scared. And it's fantastic to hear that people are reaching out and educational organisations are helping students, which is really fantastic here. So before we go to the questions, I do want to go around the group, the panelists, and just try and get a lasting word or a takeaway from everyone, if that's okay, please. Shall we start with you, Ross?
Yeah. I just think it's probably something from my own heart, is that I think we can only get there to the point where a disability doesn't become a disadvantage if we all try as individuals and organizations to help marginalized groups. And then eventually it will become the norm, and we'll all have access in a similar way to what me and Sophie have done through technology.
Oh, Charlotte, sorry.
Mine would be, and I've just been reading the chat as I've been listening to everybody else as well, and there was a comment in chat about we don't exclude intentionally, it's just we don't know what we don't know. And I think that's a really important point and links back to Ross's and Michael's points earlier on around getting a diverse group of people means you get different views and different perspectives. And I think what's really important here that organizations should focus on really truly making sure they've got those diverse views and diverse perspectives around a table when they're talking about different products, different services, different employee experiences. So many companies have employee resource groups or networks. I question how many are really tapping into them to get their views and insights to really support them in thinking differently about what we can do as organizations. So my one quick takeaway from that is really focus on having this conversation up front. How do we make sure what we do is accessible and available to everyone? And how do we make sure we build that in right from the very start, rather than having to think about it or feeling that we have to think about it when somebody raises a question or a challenge further down the line. Start thinking about that from the real start of creating product, services, and employee experiences.
For me, I really would look at two things. I think when you're considering, well, not considering, when you are considering candidates that have disabilities like myself, see their skills, don't see their disabilities, because the reality is that there is a huge wealth of talent within the disabled community that has been overlooked for far too long. And the only people missing out are the employers, which sort of leads into my second point. When it comes to all of this, and it goes to something that was said earlier, that the boardrooms will ask, oh, well, is it really that big a problem? Do we have to do this? Why should we do this? Employers need to lead with empathy. You need to do it because it's the right thing to do. You need to do it because apologies, guys. I had a phone call coming in. I can only apologize. Lead with empathy. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because it's what you should do. And if you are serious about creating an inclusive workforce where people truly belong, it's a great place to start. Thank you.
I think mine would be just kind of nicely leading on from what Jurgen said there about making sure that you're listening as much as anything else, and making sure that when you're creating products and services, when you're speaking to customers, supporters, whatever environment that you're in, the key thing to do for people that have access requirements is to listen to what they're telling you, listen to what they're asking you, and let that be your starting point. Let that be the thing that guides you, because there's nothing more important than making sure you understand as much as you can before you go forward. So I think my key takeaway, as I say, is to listen, to understand, and to make sure you use that as a starting point.
Sophie?
I would say recognising the strengths of those with accessibility needs is incredibly important, and for them to feel empowered that they can have this access that opens their world. I'd say the accessible world is the beaming light that shines over the reflection of doubt and difficulty that individuals could have.
Thank you very much, everyone. That's great comments there to take away. So we've been pulling some questions here. We've got a few minutes, so I'll pull one or two together, and the panelists can answer away if that's all right. For organisations that want to begin providing accessibility in things like application processes, where is the best place to start?
I can attempt to answer that. I would say, essentially, there's lots of resources. So across the disability spectrum, you'll find organisations like the RNIB who support visually impaired people who can give you advice on it. I would talk to your candidate management system providers, whether it's Workday or similar to Rail. They'll have strong guidance around this now in terms of what makes their processes accessible. But really, it comes down to testing, because even the most modern of systems, I will say, I won't say the best designed, the most modern of systems are not always that accessible. So engage with your employees, engage with your employee resource groups, test the systems, look for where the problems exist, because honestly, that is the best way of doing it. Too many systems will tell you they're accessible and they just aren't.
Thank you very much, Jurgen. I'm just scrolling through, sorry, give me 2 seconds there. One for Dave. Dave, is it possible, please, that you can share an example of providing support for someone with additional needs? I take it must be on a match day. Is it an example that you're allowed to share with us, just to be able to get people to lift it up?
Just think of one example from the sort of many that we deal with. So I'm looking out to the stadium now to give me some inspiration as to one example. There's so many supporters that we've helped. I think for me, the sensory room that we have at the stadium is probably the biggest deal and the biggest one that makes such a difference, because there with the sensory room, that's been a space that's been provided for children on the autism spectrum between roughly the ages of 5 and 16, although we don't particularly define it. But to see a child that is unable to come to a football stadium because of the noise or because of the amount of people that are here, or even the colours within the stadium and the seats and the pitch, so many different things can be upsetting and distressing for autistic children. So to have a sensory room, to see the looks on those children's faces when they come into the stadium for the first time, and to see them actually be able to be at a football match for 90 minutes, whereas if they came to the general access areas of the stadium, they'd probably have to leave after 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So to see those faces of those children, I think that's the biggest and the best example of creating an inclusive space within your stadium, the change and the provision of something that without it, these kids genuinely just wouldn't be able to come to a football match. That's huge.
I think that's really important, having 2 little ones myself and thinking about that sort of stuff. You want to protect them, but you want them to enjoy an experience at the same time. So I think sensory rooms and things like that are fantastic. I know Newcastle United also have one as well. Quite a lot of clubs do. Now it's becoming they're really good. They're really good. How do you think the pandemic has affected organisations' consideration towards online accessibility? That one for you, Ross?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic in particular, it did move it forward at a quicker pace, because they started to realise, particularly through remote working staff, and the less of an ability to access anything in a physical manner. Everything was moving online and to online information. So ironically, even though it was a bad time for everybody, in the accessibility world, it did speed it up by a couple of years.
I'm just having a little look through here. Services and products. Right, sorry, let's have a look. We all have services and products that need to be tweaked or redesigned entirely. What are your top tips for successfully redesigning to ensure full accessibility? So if we've got some suites of products or services what will be them first few steps to try and create an accessible version? Where would someone maybe start in the planning? I don't know if that one's for Charlotte maybe, or Ross.
I'm happy to start, and then Ross, if you want to jump in as well. And I'm just looking at some of the other points on chat and questions. First of all, for me, it's about having that end in mind. Where do we actually want to get to around that full accessibility for either it be a service or a product? Secondly, it's spend time to think about who's going to be in the room or who's going to be part of the conversation around what's really needed to make it fully accessible. Because I think that's an area that gets really, really missed around who are the people that we need to have conversations with around the different products, the different services. Do you get insights and perspectives from consumers that have different requirements? If not, that's a great starting point. Jurgen and David mentioned this a few times around your employee resource groups or your networks. Do you tap into them effectively enough to be able to get their views and insights? If not, start tapping into them, because they're an untapped resource that you can really pull into. There are also many experts externally that you could tap into, but I would suggest that you've got a lot of people within your sphere, be it consumers or be it employees, that can help to give you some insights and give you some perspectives. So the key thing for me is really start to understand, where do you want to get to with your levels of accessibility? You may not get to the best solution straight away, but it's what are the steps that you can take to make it more accessible, each step that you do take. And then it's be really focused around the people that you get in the room to have those conversations. And commit to it. The final one for me is really commit to it and be really public, be that internally within your company or externally, to be really public around your aspirations on that, because people will start to really hold you to account.
And with regards to online content or information in general, the first point I would make is it's often banded around as user-centric design of your content, but what does it actually mean? And for me, it means individuality, and the whole world should be treated like an individual through technology. Therefore, for example, my accessibility needs, like Sophie and I, for example, we both have dyslexia, and I don't know Sophie's way of accessing content, but it's likely to be different. Mine is particularly if I have a yellow background and blue text, and it's not the best to look at with a hangover, but it does make me read much faster. 25% faster, and I can read for much longer periods. So it's all about treating your audience as an individual and not having your online content static for what you believe is the masses. So content customization is the first step.
Thank you very much. I've got the questions that are coming, there's loads. So I think what the best idea is, I'd already pre-planned this. So I think what we could do is create an FAQ sheet with your questions, and we'll call out to the panelists, get some great insightful answers, and we'll be able to send that out to everyone. Additionally, also statistics, people mentioned about the statistics, we'll put that as part of that document also, and this webinar will be able to be viewed online at a later date. So I think them 3 bits of information over to everyone will greatly help all the questions in the audience. So yeah, thank you.
Good idea. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I hope it's been insightful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.